The bruises were small. That was the thing nobody could explain later. Not the coma. Not the 6 months of silence in that lockdown hospital wing. Not even the guards posted at every stairwell exit like statues carved from bad decisions. The bruises were small. And they started a war. Nurse Delane Okafor had worked that private wing for 11 years. She had seen men carried in with bullet holes the size of quarters. She had watched monitors flatline and come back. She had learned fast that in this particular hospital, in this particular wing, you kept your mouth shut and your notes clean and you did not ask who was paying the bill. But the boy's arm stopped her cold. He was maybe 9, maybe 10. Thin in the way that meant nobody had been feeding him on schedule. He sat in the plastic chair outside room 4C with his knees pulled to his chest, and when his sleeve slipped, just a little, Delane saw it. A bruise. Dark. Maybe 4 days old. Shaped wrong. Not a fall bruise. She had worked this wing long enough to know the difference. She crouched down. The boy looked at her with eyes that did not blink the way a scared child's eyes blink. They were still. Measuring, like he was running numbers on whether she was a threat. "Hey," she said. "What's your name?" He did not answer. "Where's your mama?" Still nothing. She reached toward his arm, gentle just to look, and he let her. That was the part that stayed with her. He let her. No flinch. No pull away. He just watched her examine the bruise like it belonged to someone else. She stood. She walked to the nurse's station. She filled out an incident note the way she was trained to. Dr. Fenton barely looked up from his tablet. "Street kids," he said. "They wander in sometimes. Call the social worker on rotation. Document it. Move on." "There are 3 of them," Delane said. "Triplets. Looks like." He finally looked up, then looked back down. "Document it. Move on." She moved on. But 2 floors down, in the break room, a man in a gray maintenance uniform had his back to the coffee machine, and his ear very much tuned to the conversation happening through the open door of the station. He did not move for a long time after Delane walked away. Then he pulled out a phone, typed 4 words. 3 boys. 4th floor. He hit send. "Hi viewers. Have you ever witnessed a small moment that you knew, deep down, was the beginning of something much bigger? Drop it in the comments." I read every single one. The response came back in under 2 minutes. 1 word. Confirm. Then a second message followed immediately after. "Those boys are under his territory." The maintenance man looked at the phone. Then at the ceiling, in the general direction of the private wing 1 floor above him. His jaw tightened. He typed back. "Understood." He was gone from the break room before the coffee finished brewing. In room 4C, behind a door that required a keycard, a retinal scan, and a guard who had not smiled in 6 months, Kaler Virex lay exactly as he had lain since the night everything collapsed. Machines breathed for him. Monitors tracked him. His chest rose and fell on a schedule decided by a ventilator and nothing else. 6 months. Nobody outside this wing knew if he was healing or disappearing. Both possibilities terrified different people for very different reasons. The city above this hospital had been held together by the idea of him. Not his orders. He hadn't given any in half a year. Not his voice, nobody had heard it. Just the idea. Just the weight of his name pressed against the walls of every deal and every threat and every fragile truce that kept the streets from going fully dark. An idea can only hold that long. The whispers had started 2 months ago. Small ones. Careful. Testing the air like fingers checking a wound. Rivals repositioning. Old alliances going quiet. New ones forming in rooms where his name used to clear the table. Nobody moved yet, but everybody was getting ready to. Down the hall from room 4C, the security camera mounted at the junction of corridors B and D captured something at 11:47 p.m. that nobody on staff noticed until much later. 3 boys, walking without hesitation, past the restricted access sign, past the point where a keycard was required. They did not swipe anything. They did not force anything. They just walked through. The camera caught all 3 of their faces clearly. Same bone structure, Same measured walk. 3 versions of the same quiet, sharp stillness. They turned left at the end of the corridor. Toward room 4C. Nobody stopped them. By morning, the security team would pull the footage. By morning, they would have no explanation for how 3 children with no clearance had accessed a restricted floor in a hospital guarded like a military installation. And by morning, something else would already be burning. 40 minutes east of the hospital, in an industrial block that had changed hands twice in the last 3 years, a warehouse belonging to the Cresswell distribution network went up in flames. No accelerant was found at the origin point. No claim was made. No warning had been issued. Just fire. Then nothing. Then silence so loud it pressed against the ears of every person in that city who knew what that warehouse had actually stored, and who it had actually served. By morning, 2 more would follow, and nobody in the city's underworld would say the Alpha King's name out loud. But everyone would be thinking it. The door to room 4C did not open from the outside without a keycard. It opened anyway. Zephyr moved first, he always did. Oldest by 4 minutes, and those 4 minutes had apparently wired something into him that could not be unwired. He stepped inside the room with his shoulders level and his breathing controlled and his eyes already running the layout before the door finished swinging shut behind him. Machines. Monitors. Tubes. 1 bed. 1 man. He cataloged it all in about 3 seconds. Cashin came in after him. Middle. He went straight to the monitor on the left side, the one tracking brain activity, and tilted his head at the numbers on the screen. Not reading them with worry. Reading them with the particular focus of someone trying to solve a thing. Idris was last. He was the smallest of the 3, though not by much. And he stopped just inside the doorway and looked at the man in the bed for a long time without moving. Then he said, quiet as anything, "He's bigger than I thought." Zephyr turned. "Keep your voice down." "I am keeping my voice down." "Keep it more down." Cashin ignored both of them and moved around the bed to the right side monitor. His fingers hovered near the screen, not touching, just close, reading. The man in the bed did not move. Kaler Virex at rest was still a thing that took up space the way walls do. Even flat on his back, even with tubes running in 3 directions, even with 6 months of stillness pressed into him. He was large in a way that the room acknowledged. Like the air around the bed knew what was lying in it. Zephyr walked closer. He stopped at the edge of the bed and looked at Kaler's face for a long time. Then he pulled a chair from the corner and sat down. Like he was staying. Like this was something he had planned. "You've been here a while," he said. Not loud. Not a performance. Just a statement aimed at a man who could not hear it. "We heard about you. Everybody's heard about you. Even people who act like they don't know your name know your name." No response. Of course. The ventilator pushed air. The monitor tracked a heartbeat. The room held its breath. "We came in through the 3rd floor east corridor," Cashin said, still looking at the monitor. "The camera at Junction BD has a 4-second lag on its rotation cycle. We timed it." "Nobody asked," Idris said. "I'm telling you anyway." Idris moved further into the room. He came to the opposite side of the bed from Zephyr and stood there looking at Kaler's arm, the one with the 4-line running into the crook of his elbow. He looked at it the way someone looks at a thing they recognize but cannot quite place. Then he looked at Kaler's face. "You said no one touches what's yours," Idris said. His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it. Something old for a kid his age. "That's what they say about you. That's the whole thing. Nobody touches what you've claimed. Ever." He paused. "So how come we're bleeding?" The monitor kept its rhythm. Zephyr looked at his youngest brother across the bed. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite anger. Something that had been pressed flat by time and stayed that way. "He can't answer you," Zephyr said. "I know," Idris said. "I'm telling him anyway. Power doesn't always protect the loudest. Sometimes it shelters what no one sees. And sometimes the thing it was supposed to shield most is the last thing it reaches." Cashin turned from the monitor. He looked at his brothers. Then he looked at Kaler. His brain activity is not flat, Cashin said. It's low, but it's not flat. There's still something happening in there. What does that mean? Idris asked. It means he's in there somewhere. Silence. Zephyr leaned forward slightly in the chair. If you can hear anything, he said to the man in the bed. Not dramatic. Not begging. Just level. You should know. Somebody's been paying attention to us. Not in the good way. We've been managing it. But we can't manage it forever. He stopped. Thought you should know. He sat back. Cashin had drifted back toward the door while his brothers talked. He was standing near the hallway junction that connected to the camera in the BD corridor, the one that had already captured them coming in. He reached up. His fingers moved across a small panel behind the camera housing with the kind of practiced ease that looked completely wrong on a kid his age. The camera's indicator light went dark. Idris looked at him from across the room. You could have done that before we walked in. It logs the shutdown, Cashin said. This way it looks like a power glitch. Happens on this floor. I checked the maintenance records. A beat. Last Tuesday. Same camera. 11:49 p.m. Idris stared at him. When did you check the maintenance records? Last Tuesday. Same time. Idris looked at the ceiling. Then at Kaler. He does this, he told the man in the bed. Acts like being 3 steps ahead is normal. The ventilator breathed. Zephyr stood. He looked at Kaler one more time, the kind of look you give something you're not sure you'll see again. Then he straightened. We're going, he said. But we'll be back. He said it the way someone makes a promise. Not to reassure. Just to state a fact that was going to happen regardless. They moved toward the door. Idris stopped just before the threshold. He turned back to the bed. The monitors. The steady mechanical rhythm of a man held at the edge of something. You don't get to just lie there, he said. Not now. He walked out. The camera in the hall stayed dark. And in the room, for 3 seconds after the door clicked shut, just 3 seconds, the brain activity monitor spiked. Then settled. Like a question being considered. Then set aside. Nobody ordered the retaliation. That was the part that terrified them. In the world that Kaler Virex had built. And it was a world, not just territory, not just turf, but an actual functional system with its own rules and pressure points and consequences. Nothing moved without his say. That was the foundation. That was the whole architecture. One voice. One signal. Everything downstream from that. He was 6 months into a coma. No voice. No signal. And yet, the Cresswell warehouse went up on a Thursday. Friday morning, a supply chain linked to the Morano family went dark. Not violently, just disconnected, like someone had pulled a plug. Shipments rerouted. Contacts stopped answering. A distribution node that had run for 3 years simply stopped existing in any functional sense. Saturday, a man named Devant Ashby, who had made a very specific set of decisions in the past 3 weeks that a very specific number of people knew about, had a meeting canceled. Then another. Then his car was towed from a private garage that he did not have public record of using. None of it was violent. All of it was precise. That was the thing that broke people open. The violence they could handle. The city had language for violence, response protocols, countermoves, escalation paths. Violence made sense. It had a grammar. This didn't have a grammar. This had a pattern. Demarion Holloway, who ran the Eastern Logistics for 3 separate operations and had kept his name clean enough to move between rooms that did not normally share air, spread the word carefully. He was good at careful. He had survived 4 power shifts in 8 years by being good at careful. He called a meet at a laundry facility off Kessler Avenue 6 people. 3 factions. Represented but not committed. Just listening. It follows the boys, he said. Quiet in the room. The first incident, the nurse report, the 4th floor situation, that's when the Cresswell property burned. Second incident. Boys got roughed up near the East Shelter Tuesday night. Wednesday, Ashby lost 3 contacts in 4 hours. One of the 6, a woman named Chandra Reese who ran comms for the Valis network, leaned forward. You're saying the retaliation is tied to them. I'm saying the timeline is tied to them. Every time something happens to those boys, something happens to whoever was nearby when it happened. Kaylor is in a coma, someone said. I know he's in a coma. So whose? I don't know. Demarian looked at each face. That's why we're here. People don't fear power. They fear what moves without permission. Because power with permission has edges. You can find the edges. You can negotiate against the edges. But power that moves on its own, that comes from somewhere you can't locate and stops at a point you can't predict, that is a different thing entirely. The meat broke without resolution. But it broke with something worse. A shared understanding that something was operating in the city that none of them could map. 3 days later, Demarian's phone lit up with an encrypted message. The routing was so clean it could have come from anywhere. The king still watches. He read it twice. He deleted it. He sat in his car in the parking structure off 5th for 23 minutes without moving. Then he drove directly to the hospital. He did not go to the 4th floor. He sat in the lobby with a cup of coffee. He did not drink and watched the elevator indicators and thought very carefully about what it would mean if the message was true, and what it would mean if it wasn't. In the private wing, Nurse Delane Okafor had started doing something she could not fully explain. Every time she passed room for C on her rounds, she slowed. Just slightly. Just enough to check the monitors through the window panel. Just enough to confirm the rhythm was still there. She told herself it was professional habit. That was not what it was. What it was, and she would not have said this out loud to anyone, was a feeling. Like the room was different than it had been 2 weeks ago. Like something in it had shifted. Nothing she could point to on a chart. Just a weight in the air that had not been there before. She had worked this wing long enough to trust the feeling. She did not know what to do with it. In a building 40 minutes from the hospital. A building with very clean windows and very clean records and a very particular kind of money behind it. A man named Corvin Steele sat behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars and looked at a photograph. 3 boys. His face when he looked at the photograph was not readable in the ordinary way. There was no surprise there. But there was something. Something careful. Something that moved behind his eyes like a calculation completing itself. His associate, standing near the window, said, "They came up in a sweep of the 4th floor footage. 3 separate incidents, same 3 subjects. No ID in any system. No guardian record. No school enrollment." Corvin Steele looked at the photograph. "Run the biometrics again," he said. "We did. Twice. Run them again." The associate hesitated. "The result's going to be the same." "I know what the result is going to be." Steele set the photograph down. "Run them again." The associate left. Corvin Steele sat with the photograph for a long time after that. The oldest boy's face. Still. Watching whoever took the image with the same flat, measuring look that Delane Okafor had seen on the 4th floor. Steele picked the photo back up. "They're not random," he said. To no one. To himself. His hand, holding the photograph, was very still. But his jaw had tightened in a way that meant whatever the biometric results confirmed, he already knew. And he was not going to like what came next. The file was thin. That was the first thing Corvin Steele's lead archivist said when she put it on the desk. For a priority-level event, the documentation is extremely thin. "That was intentional," Steele said. She looked at him. "Leave it," he said. She left. He opened the file. The photographs inside were old. Physical prints, not digital. Someone had made a decision years ago to keep certain records off of any server that could be accessed or searched or swept in an audit. Someone had decided that paper was safer than encryption for this particular history. They were right. The file held 8 photographs, a 2-page incident summary with the top quarter redacted, and a single handwritten note in the margin of the last page. The note said, "Confirm elimination. All 3. Do not leave the bloodline open." Steele had read that line before. He had written it. He set the file down, leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, the city moved in its ordinary way. Traffic, pedestrians, the low groan of a metropolis doing its daily business. None of it aware of what was sitting on this desk. None of it aware of what had been decided in a room very much like this one, 8 years ago, when certain problems were still small enough to be solved quietly. The triplets were supposed to be dead. That was not a complicated sentence. It was not ambiguous. The order had been clear. The bloodline, specifically the surviving branch of the Virex-opposing Yelcroft family, the one that had been sheltered inside an Omega compound before the compound was removed, was supposed to end there. The records said it had 3 bodies, listed, confirmed, except the biometrics didn't lie. Cashin's bone structure matched a subject from the compound records at a 98.7% probability. Idris's eye spacing and nasal geometry put him at the same percentage. Zephyr, the oldest by 4 minutes according to a hospital record that no one was supposed to be able to find, matched the profile of a child who was marked deceased on a date that corresponded with the compound's removal. They were alive, 8 years after they were supposed to not be. And they were in the same hospital as Kaler Virex. Steele stood, walked to the window. He did not pace. Pacing was for people who hadn't learned to process things standing still. He stood and looked at the city and thought it through piece by piece the way he had always thought things through. The boys hadn't found Kaler by accident. That was the core of it. That was the thing that separated this from an unfortunate coincidence. Children didn't navigate restricted hospital wings on instinct. They navigated them because they had been taught to navigate them, because someone had prepared them, because they knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where it was. Someone had told them about Kaler. Someone had pointed them at him. Someone who knew the history, the real history, the one that was supposed to stay thin and off-server and buried under a margin note that nobody alive should be able to read. In the hospital. 4th floor. In the chair beside the bed, Zephyr sat with his elbows on his knees. The room was dim, the way hospital rooms get dim in the late afternoon when the sun hits the window at a low angle and throws long shadows across the floor. He had been sitting for 40 minutes. The others had gone to get food from the vending machine on the 2nd floor. He sat alone. He looked at Kaler's face. "We stopped waiting," Zephyr said. "I want you to know that, in case it matters. In case this is something you're going to wake up and have opinions about." He paused. "We stopped waiting for someone to come. About 3 years ago. We figured out that waiting is just a slower way of getting hurt." The monitor kept its rhythm. "We've been handling it." He said it flat. Not proud. Not defensive. Just accurate. Not perfectly, but handling it. "We learned which networks were yours. We learned how to move near them without getting caught. We learned a lot of things." He looked at his own hands. Some of it we're too young to know. But we know it anyway. A beat. "We found you because..." He stopped. Started again. "We found you because somebody kept your name alive for us. And that person told us things about where we came from that you're gonna have to explain when you wake up. Because I have questions. And Cashin has more questions than I do. And Idris doesn't ask questions. He just stares at people until they talk." He almost smiled. Almost. "So. Wake up." He stood. Pushed the chair back to the corner where it lived. He was walking toward the door when he stopped. Like a thought had landed on him. He turned back. "We stopped waiting for someone to save us," he said. "That's true. That's real." He held the room's gaze for a moment, or the room held his. "But we're still here. So." He left. The door clicked. In a building on the other side of the city, in a room with clean windows and a thin file on the desk, Corvin Steele was on the phone. "Listen carefully," he said. "The situation has changed. The children are a liability we cannot hold open. I want a team at the hospital within 48 hours. A pause. Listening. "Yes, them specifically." Another pause. "No." Quietly. "The wing is guarded. Work around it." He ended the call. He looked at the file. He closed it. Stood the file on its spine on the corner of the desk, the way a person sets aside something they've decided on. "Remove the children," he said. To no one. To the city outside his window. Quietly. They came at 2:17 a.m. The power to the fourth floor went out at 2:14. Not the whole hospital. That would have triggered emergency protocols and alarms and a response time that made precision impossible. Just the fourth floor. A surgical cut at the junction box in the service corridor behind the east stairwell. Somebody who knew exactly where to cut and exactly how long they had before the backup generators kicked in. 3 minutes. Darkness and silence and 3 minutes. The guard outside room 4C reached for his radio. Got static. Reached for his phone. No signal. He stood up from his chair, and then something hit the wall 6 inches from his head and he went down before his hand finished moving. Not dead. That mattered. They were being careful about that part. Inside room 4C, the monitor lights were running on internal battery. The ventilator kept its cycle. Kaler Virex did not move. Cashin was already at the window panel. He had his phone out not to call anyone, but for the light. He moved it across the monitor face in a slow arc, reading the numbers in the narrow glow. His expression was the same as it always was when he was processing something, flat and focused and very, very fast. "We've got 4 minutes before the backup kicks in," he said. They cut the junction on B corridor. Zephyr was at the door, not opening it, just listening. His hand was pressed flat against the surface, feeling the vibrations the way someone listens through a wall. 2 in the corridor, he said. Maybe 3. They're moving quiet. Moving toward us? Idris said. Moving toward us. Idris was standing beside the bed. He was not hiding under it. He was not pressing himself into the corner. He was standing beside the bed with his arms at his sides and his eyes fixed on the door with that particular stillness that he'd carried since he was old enough to carry anything. Then we don't move, Idris said. Zephyr turned. Idris. We don't move, Idris said again. Same tone. They're here for us. If we move, they chase us through the building and we lose the ground we know. We stay here. We know this room. A beat. Besides. He glanced at the bed. Someone has to stay. Cashin moved to the back wall. There was a call panel there, the kind hospitals use for nurse alerts and room-to-room communication. He opened the cover with a flathead from his pocket and looked at the wiring for about 2 seconds. Then his hands moved. From somewhere deeper in the building, the corridor that connected the restricted wing to the fire exit on the east side. A series of locks engaged. Not just the door to 4C. The whole corridor. 12-second delay on the backup generator. Cashin had added a lockdown sequence to the emergency protocol that would run automatically when the power restored. By the time the people in that corridor realized they were locked into a section of a hospital with reinforced fire doors that did not open from the inside without a code, they'd have a different problem. Zephyr stared at his brother. When did you? Last week, Cashin said. When I checked the maintenance records. Outside in the hall, voices. Low and controlled. The kind of voices that belonged to people who did this professionally and knew how to keep the noise tight. Then the sound of something hitting a door. Testing it. Finding it locked. More voices. Sharper now. Idris had not moved. He was still standing beside the bed. His face was still in the dim blue light of the monitors. He was looking at Kaler's face the way he had looked at it the first night, searching for something that he had not yet found. You don't get to sleep through this, Idris said, quiet, direct, aimed at the man on the bed like a flare aimed at something offshore. I know you can't hear me. I know that's probably not how any of this works, but just in case. He paused. They sent people. For us. Tonight. And Cashin locked the corridor, and that's going to buy us some time, but it's not going to buy us enough time, and I need you to. He stopped. Because the monitor changed. Not dramatically. Not the way monitors change in movies. Just a shift. A small one. The kind that a trained eye would notice and an untrained eye would explain away. The brain activity line moved. Then settled. But it had moved. Idris stared at it. Zephyr came across the room fast. He looked at the monitor, then at his youngest brother, then at Kaler. In the hall, the sound of a body hitting a door, harder now, testing the hinges. Then silence. Then, from the other side of the door, clear enough to travel through it, the sound of a single voice. Low. Professional. Decided. Take the boy. The one near the window. Leave the other two. Idris turned to look at the door. He turned back. He looked at Kaler. The brain activity line held. Then the door to room 4C opened. Not from the outside, the lock held. From the inside. The guard code. Someone had it. The man who stepped in first was wearing dark gear and moving with the trained economy of someone who had done this before and planned to do it again. His weapon was already up. His eyes swept the room in half a second. Found Idris. Moved toward him. And Idris, 9 years old, maybe 10, thin in the way that meant nobody had been feeding him on schedule, did not move, did not run, did not make a sound. He stood next to the bed. His eyes on the man coming toward him. The man reached out. Put a hand on Idris's shoulder. The gun came up, aimed directly at his head. And the monitor behind him, flatlined, then spiked. Then the gun did not fire. That was the first thing. The man holding it, trained, precise, the kind of professional who did not hesitate, hesitated. His hand was on Idris's shoulder. The weapon was up. The angle was clean. Everything was in place for a thing that should have taken less than a second. And he stopped. Not because someone stopped him. Because the room stopped him. The monitor behind Idris went from a flatline spike to something that filled the whole screen. A wave of activity so sudden and so sharp that the machine produced an audible alarm for the first time in 6 months. Not the soft beep of a routine check. A full alert. The kind that pulls medical staff from 3 corridors away. The man with the gun looked at the monitor. Then at the man in the bed. Then at the boy standing beside the bed who had not moved an inch. Idris looked back at him with those flat, still eyes. No tears. No shaking. Just watching. Go ahead, Idris said. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. The man with the gun lowered it. Not all the way. Just enough. Just a degree or two of angle shift, but in that room, in that moment, it meant everything. From the doorway, the other man, the one who had been hanging back as entry support, said something low and sharp. A word that was not English. A signal. And they moved. Fast. Backward. The door swung closed. Footsteps in the corridor. Quick. Then the sound of the fire exit at the far end of the hall engaging. The crash bar. The rush of outside air. Gone. Zephyr crossed the room in 4 steps and had his hand on Idris's arm before his brother could take a breath. You okay? I'm fine. Idris. I'm fine. He looked at Zephyr. They left. I know they left. Why did they leave? Zephyr looked at the monitor. The brain activity wave had not settled back to its previous baseline. It was running higher. Measurably, visibly higher than it had been 60 seconds ago. Cashin moved from the back wall. He stood next to his brothers and all 3 of them looked at the monitor together in silence. That's not the machine's glitching, Cashin said. Nobody disagreed. Sometimes survival isn't about strength. It's about who refuses to let you disappear. That matters here. Hold on to that. Because what happened in that room in the next 47 seconds would travel through 3 encrypted networks before dawn. And by morning, every major player in the city would know that the Alpha King's brain activity had spiked at the exact moment a weapon was pointed at a child standing beside his bed. The interpretations varied. The fear did not. Demarion Holloway got the alert at 3:04 a.m. He read it once. Then he sat on the edge of his bed with his phone in his hand and stared at the wall for a very long time. In 6 months, he had been very careful about what conclusions he allowed himself to draw. Evidence could be managed. Coincidence could be explained. But this, a documented brain spike, hospital staff witnesses, a professional team that retreated from a 9-year-old boy because of a monitor alarm, this was not something that fit inside a manageable framework. He typed a message to 3 contacts simultaneously. Stand down all operations near that hospital. Effective immediately. He did not explain why. He did not need to. In the private wing, Nurse Delane Okafor arrived with the crash team at 3:06 a.m. She pushed through the door to foresee, expecting the worst. A flat line, a failed tube, something clinical and terrible. She found 3 boys standing beside the bed. She found monitors running higher than they had in 6 months. She found Kaler Virex exactly as she had left him on her last rounds. Still, tubes, ventilator cycling. But the numbers on that screen. She looked at the boys. The oldest one looked back at her without expression. Something happened, he said. I can see that, she said. The activity on the brain monitor. Has it done that before? She looked at the screen. Not like that. He nodded, like she had confirmed something. Okay. She should have called security. She should have removed them from the room and filed a report and followed protocol the way she had followed protocol for 11 years in this wing. She pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, and started reviewing the numbers. In a building across the city, in a room with clean windows, a figure watched the live feed from a camera that had no business being pointed at the 4th floor of a private hospital. The feed was clear enough. The spike was visible on the screen-within-screen view of the monitor data being transmitted from the wing's internal system. The figure did not move for a long time. Then, to the associate standing nearby, "He's waking up." A pause. "If he wakes, everything we buried comes back." The associate said nothing. The figure turned from the screen. "We're out of time. 4 years before the coma. 3 years before the warehouse burned. 5 years before 3 boys walked through a restricted door without clearance. There was a shelter. It ran off the records. No city registration. No formal address in any social services database. It occupied the lower 2 floors of a building that was listed as a commercial storage unit, and it housed, at its peak, 43 Omegas and 11 children, most of them without documentation of any kind. It was, by every formal measure, invisible. And for 3 years, that invisibility kept it alive. The woman who ran it was named Celestine Odom. She was 51 years old and moved through the world like someone who had decided very early that the world's permission was optional. She fed people. She kept records, her own records, the kind nobody else had access to, and she made calls to people who could move resources without leaving footprints. One of those people was Kaler Virex. Not directly, not personally. Through a chain of intermediaries that kept his name 3 steps removed from anything that could be traced. But the money that kept Celestine's shelter running, the supply deliveries, the medical access, the occasional very quiet intervention when the building's location was at risk, that came from one source. He knew about the shelter. He knew about the children. He knew, specifically, about 3 boys who had been brought in during a night that Celestine had later described in her private records as the worst night she could remember. 3 boys, maybe 2 years old at that point, carried in by a woman who said nothing and left before morning and was never seen again. Kaler knew. He made a choice. Not to bring them in. Not to absorb them into whatever structure he maintained. Just to keep the shelter funded. To keep the location protected. To let Celestine do what Celestine did and make sure nobody with bad intentions found the address. It was a calculated decision. It was also a wrong one, because 3 years into that arrangement someone did find the address. And Kaler was 40 minutes away when the call came. He drove. He drove the way you drive when something is wrong and you don't know yet how wrong and you are already doing the math on what you are going to do when you get there. 40 minutes. Every light. He arrived to a building that was still standing. The shelter was not inside it anymore. The people, Celestine, the Omegas, the children, were gone. Not violently gone. Not the way he had feared, but gone. Cleared out in under an hour by people who had known exactly where to look and exactly what to take. Celestine was found 2 days later at a transit station, alone, carrying nothing. She told him what she could. The operation had been coordinated, professional. Nobody had been physically harmed. The children had been separated from the adults. All of them, including 3 boys, 2 years old, who had been at the shelter since a night Celestine described as the worst she could remember. Kaler made a second choice. He chose war. Not rescue. Not search. Not the quiet, careful work of finding 11 children spread across a city by people who did not want them found. He chose to hit back at the network responsible because that was what he knew how to do, and because he told himself that hitting the source was the fastest path to finding where they had been taken. He was wrong. And somewhere in the part of himself that he did not allow to run in public, he knew it at the time. The war took 8 months. It dismantled 3 networks. It cost bodies on both sides and reshuffled the city's entire power map. It did not find 11 children. It found 8. 3 were never recovered. The files listed them as unresolved. Not deceased. Not located. Just open. A category that meant nobody knew and nobody was going to spend more resources finding out. Kaler closed that file. He kept moving. 3 years later, he was in a coma. And now, Idris was standing in a hospital room, the smallest of 3 boys, maybe 9 years old, thin in the way that said nobody had been on schedule about feeding him, and he was looking at the face of the man who had made those 2 choices. He was looking at it like he recognized it. He did. He had seen the photograph. Celestine had shown them photographs. She had survived the years between the shelter and the present by being very careful and very deliberate about what she kept and who she prepared for what was coming. She had not been silent. She had been patient. You were there, Idris said. Not to the room. Not to his brothers. To the man in the bed. Directly. Not at the shelter. After. He paused. She showed us a picture of you. The night you showed up and it was already empty. She said. He stopped. Something moved through his face that was not quite anger and not quite grief and was probably the specific thing that lives between those 2. She said you stood in the doorway for a long time. And then you left. The monitor ran its baseline rhythm. Cashin, from across the room, did not say anything. Zephyr had gone very still. She said you chose the wrong thing, Idris continued. Not because you were bad. Because you were fast. You made the fast decision instead of the right one. He looked at Kaler's face. She wasn't angry. She just wanted us to know. A long silence. I'm a little angry, Idris said. And then, without dramatic lead-up, without a machine alarm, without any of the indicators that the medical staff would later struggle to explain, Kaler Virex's eyes opened. Not wide. Not all the way. Just enough. Just a sliver of focus cutting through 6 months of nothing. He looked at the ceiling. Then slowly, very slowly, the way something moves when it is remembering how movement works, he turned his head and looked at Idris. Idris looked back. Neither of them spoke. The ventilator cycled. The monitor ran. And somewhere in the space between a man who had made the wrong choice and a boy who had survived it, something shifted. The night staff found out at 4:38 a.m. The doctor on call, a man named Dr. Fenwick Parade, who had been managing Kaler's case for 4 of the 6 months and had stopped expecting good news around month 3, stood at the side of the bed and ran through the standard checks with the particular stillness of someone making sure what they were seeing was actually what they were seeing. Pupil response. Tracking. Grip test. He sat back. He's conscious, he said, like he was telling himself. Delane Okafor, standing near the door with the 3 boys behind her. She had not sent them out, which she could not fully explain later, said. The brain activity spiked around 3 a.m. I documented it. I saw your notes. Dr. Parade looked at the monitors. This is not typical emergence. The rate of recovery is, he stopped. Medical language failing him for a moment. This is fast. Is that a problem? Cashin asked from near the door. Dr. Parade looked at the boy, then at Delane. She shrugged slightly, the universal gesture for, I don't know what to tell you either. Word moved fast. This is the thing about a city built on information. When a piece of information is large enough, it does not wait for permission. It seeps through encrypted channels and voice calls, and one person telling one trusted contact who tells one trusted contact who tells. By 6 a.m., 3 separate networks had confirmed the rumor. By 7 a.m., it was no longer a rumor. Kaler Virex was awake. The city did not react calmly. The Eastern Distribution Block rerouted 2 scheduled operations within the hour, not because anyone told them to, but because the calculus of what they had been doing for 6 months changed entirely the moment the Alpha King was no longer guaranteed to stay unconscious. Deals that had been quietly renegotiated under the assumption of a permanent power vacuum stopped being good deals very fast. A man named Percival Drews, who had spent the last 4 months carefully acquiring territory and influence that had been left unguarded during the vacuum, received the news while eating breakfast and put his fork down and did not pick it up again. 3 alliances that had been formed in the last 60 days became liabilities overnight. The city was not erupting with violence. It was doing something worse. It was recalculating. In room 4C, the ventilator had been removed by 8 a.m. Kaler was breathing on his own, slowly, with effort, but on his own. He had not spoken yet. His throat was raw from months of the tube. Dr. Parade had explained this. He'd explained a lot of things in the past 3 hours, in the careful, measured way doctors explain things when they are managing both a patient and a situation that extends well beyond medicine. The guards in the corridor had doubled, then tripled. Someone on the security team had made calls. Kaler lay in the bed with his eyes open and tracked the room the way someone tracks a space they are not yet sure of. His face gave nothing away. 6 months had not softened it. If anything, the stillness of the coma had pressed it into something harder, like the absence of expression had become the expression. The boys had been moved to the chairs by the window. Delane had brought them something from the vending machine, crackers, juice, the sad currency of a hospital at 4 a.m. And they sat with it without eating much of it and watched the man in the bed. Kaler's eyes moved to them. He looked at Zephyr, then Cashin, then Idris. He stayed on Idris for a moment longer. His mouth moved. Not words. Not yet. The throat wasn't ready. But the shape of the words, Delane had worked long enough with nonverbal patience to read it. 2 words. She read them off his lips. The boys. Not, where am I? Not, what happened? Not, how long? The boys. Zephyr sat forward in his chair. We're here, he said. Level. No drama in it. Just fact. Kaler's eyes stayed on him. His chest rose and fell. Once, twice. The deliberate breathing of someone working to keep the body in line with what the mind wanted to do. Then his hand moved. Just the left one. An inch, maybe 2, toward the edge of the bed. Not reaching, just open. Palm up. Zephyr looked at it. He looked at his brothers. Then he looked back at the hand. He did not move. None of them moved. And Kaler did not push. He left the hand there open and closed his eyes, and the monitors ran their rhythms, and the room held the particular quiet of something unresolved. At 9:17 a.m., Dr. Parade came back with the updated chart and 2 additional nurses and a security consultant who introduced himself and was immediately asked to wait outside. Kaler's first confirmed spoken word, rough, barely audible, costing him something visible, came at 9:23 a.m. 1 word. Boys. Not a question. Not a command. Just a word placed in the room like something he needed to confirm was real. Delane answered for all of them. There in the chairs by the window. He did not open his eyes, but something in his face eased. Just slightly, like a weight had moved. At 10:48 a.m., when the security team had fully established a perimeter, and 2 of Kaler's senior associates had arrived and were being held in the corridor while everything was sorted, Dr. Parade entered the room for the 3rd time that morning and stopped. The chairs by the window were empty. The juice boxes were on the sill. The crackers were untouched. The boys were gone. He checked the corridor, checked the bathroom, stood in the middle of room 4C and turned around slowly like the room might offer an explanation. Kaler was looking at the empty chairs. They left, Dr. Parade said. Kaler did not answer. He was looking at the chairs the way a person looks at a thing they understand but that still costs them something to face. The window beside the chairs caught the morning light. The juice boxes stood in a line on the sill, 3 of them, arranged with a particular neatness that could not have been accidental. Smallest to tallest. Dr. Parade looked at Kaler. Kaler looked at the chairs and said nothing. They had been gone for 11 days when the pattern became impossible to ignore. 11 days since the room was found empty. 11 days of Kaler recovering. Faster than any of the medical staff were prepared to document without very careful language. And 11 days of the city restructuring itself around the confirmed fact of his return. The reorganization was not gentle. 3 operations that had expanded into his territory during the vacuum were dismantled inside a week. Not through violence, through something more efficient. Paperwork. Contacts going quiet. Supply chains rerouting so specifically that the only explanation was that someone had detailed knowledge of every node in every network that had moved into the space he'd left behind. Percival Drews lost 2 properties in 4 days. He could not explain how. He could not find who to be angry at. That was the part that broke people. The anger had no face, no address, no single point of origin, just precision. Demarion Holloway figured it out on day 9. He was sitting with a spreadsheet of event timestamps, the kind of careful, obsessive documentation that had kept him alive through 4 power shifts, and he found the thread. Every retaliation since month 3 of the coma corresponded to a window following direct contact with the boys. Not following orders from Kaler. Following contact with the boys. Every piece of information that had destabilized rival operations. The supply chain data, the distribution node locations, the financial routing that had quietly severed Drews from 2 of his most reliable networks, had leaked from sources that only made sense if someone with very particular access had been gathering it very carefully for a very long time. Demarion sat back. They didn't need saving, he said, to the empty room. He meant it as an observation. It landed on him like a correction. Power isn't always who holds it. Sometimes it's who understands it. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone decided wasn't a threat. That matters. Sit with that. The boys had spent 3 years near the edges of Kaler's network. Close enough to learn its shape. Close enough to understand how it moved and what it feared and where its pressure points were. They had not been absorbed into it. They had been adjacent to it, and adjacency, for 3 minds as precise as theirs, was enough. Zephyr had mapped the alliance structures, methodically, over 18 months. He had a mental model of who owed what to whom that was more current than anything in Kaler's own files. Cashin had the technical access. He had not started with the hospital camera. That was recent work. He had started with public infrastructure, city maintenance logs, utility routing, the unsexy back-end data of a city that most people never thought about, and built upward from there until he had visibility into systems that officially required clearance. Idris was the one who talked to people. That was his part. The part that looked the most ordinary and was the least. He had a quality, the stillness, the directness, the way he did not perform anything, did not warm up, did not manage the room, that made people tell him things they had not planned to say. In shelters. In street-level contacts. In the kind of casual, unmemorable interactions that nobody logs and nobody remembers. He listened. He remembered everything. Together, over 3 years, they had assembled something that had no name and left no official record. A picture of the city's underside so detailed and so current that it made the intelligence held by any single organization look like a rough sketch. And in the 11 days since they had walked out of room 4C, juice boxes lined up on the sill, smallest to tallest, deliberate, they had used it. Everything destabilized. All factions. Not just the rivals. Not just the people who had harmed them. Every organization that had moved on the assumption that the vacuum was permanent got hit with something specific. A leak here. A reroute there. An anonymous tip that landed in exactly the right hands to create exactly the right kind of chaos. Nobody was exempt. Kaler was in a physical therapy room on the 3rd floor of the hospital when Demarion's message came through on the secure line his team had set up. He read it twice. Then he put the phone down. Then he picked it up again and read it a 3rd time. Demarion's message was 3 sentences. The boys orchestrated it. All of it. They didn't need you, they used your name. Kaler sat with that for a moment. He thought about the empty chairs. The juice boxes in a line. Idris looking at him the way someone looks at an explanation they have already worked out. His senior associate Brennan Odieno, who had been with him for 9 years and was one of 3 people in the city Kaler trusted at the level where you show someone where you actually are, was sitting across from him. "We found them," Odieno said. He paused. Kind of. We found a location. The trace it's clean. Too clean. The kind of clean where someone left it for you to find." Kaler looked at him. "It's a trap," Odieno said. "I know it's a trap. So, we go anyway." Odieno looked at him for a long moment. "That's what they're counting on." "I know." Kaler set down the phone, reached for the grip bar on the wall. His legs were still rebuilding, still working back toward where they were. "Tell me something. In 9 years, has anyone who came after those boys had a good outcome?" Odieno thought about it. Genuinely thought about it. "No," he said. "Then stop being surprised that I'm not going to send someone else." He stood. Cost him something visible. He stood anyway. The location was a warehouse. Of course it was. It was always a warehouse. The city had 1,000 of them, converted, abandoned, repurposed, owned by shell companies that were owned by other shell companies. And they all looked the same from the outside. Cold concrete. High windows. The smell of something industrial that never fully left. This one was on the east side, registered to a logistics company that had 3 employees on paper and did not appear to actually move anything. Clean address. Nothing remarkable. Kaler stood outside it in the early morning dark with Odieno 2 steps behind him and 4 additional people spread in a perimeter that covered the approaches. He had not brought more than that. He had made a choice about that. He pushed the door. It opened. No resistance. Of course. Inside, the warehouse was not empty. It was lit, actual lights, not flashlights, the overhead kind that made the space look used and deliberate. 3 folding tables. Crates stacked along the east wall. A setup that read as temporary but had clearly been in place for a while. And 3 boys at the center of it. Zephyr was standing. Cashin was seated at the middle table with a laptop open, its screen casting blue light up onto his face. Idris was standing on the far side of the space, near the east wall, with his arms crossed and his eyes already on the door before Kaler finished walking through it. Nobody spoke for a moment. Kaler took in the room, the tables, the crates, supply logistics from what he could see. Actual operational materials. This was not a hiding place. This was a working space. "You've been here," he said. "Most of the time," Zephyr said. "The rest of the time? Around." Kaler walked further into the room. His legs were steady, not back to full strength but steady enough. He moved carefully. Not because he was afraid. Because he was paying attention. He looked at the table Cashin was working at. The screen showed what looked like a network map, nodes, connections, color-coded by something he did not have the reference for. "That's the current faction map," Cashin said without looking up. "Everything active in the city as of this morning. I update it daily." "How long have you been building it?" 14 months. Kaler stood and looked at it. Then he looked at Zephyr. "You leaked the supply chain data on the Druze network," he said. Not a question. "Yes. The financial routing on the East distribution block. That was Cashin. The shelter locations on the Valis network, the ones they were using as clearinghouses. That one was Idris," Zephyr said. "He talked to 7 people across 3 weeks. None of them knew they were talking to each other." Kaler looked at Idris. Idris looked back. "I failed you," Kaler said. He said it the way he did most things, level, no performance, just the words placed in the room. Idris did not answer immediately. Zephyr said, "You chose war." It was not an accusation. It was an answer to a different question than the one Kaler had asked. It was a description, an explanation of the thing that had happened and the shape it left behind. "I chose war," Kaler said, "instead of the right thing." "Celestine said you'd say that eventually," Idris said. "She said you were the kind of person who takes a long time to arrive at the obvious thing. But you get there. A beat. Eventually." Kaler stood in the middle of the warehouse and looked at three boys who had survived the thing he had chosen to leave unresolved and had then, while he was unconscious, used everything they had learned in the space of his absence to reshape the city he had built. They had not destroyed it. That was the part he had not expected. He had expected damage. He had expected the particular chaos of people with grievances and tools. They had not destroyed anything. They had restructured it. Quietly, surgically. Every move calibrated not to tear down but to correct. To remove the parts that had grown wrong in the vacuum and stabilize what was underneath. They had done it better than he would have. He needed to sit with that. He knew it. He sat with it standing up, which is the only way some people can. "What do you want?" he said. The question was to all three of them. But he was looking at Zephyr when he asked it, oldest by 4 minutes, the one who planned, the one whose stillness had the most structure under it. Zephyr looked at his brothers. Cashin had closed the laptop. Idris had uncrossed his arms. "We want it to stop," Zephyr said. "The targeting. The people who keep finding us because of what we are and where we came from. We want the bloodline thing ended, not hidden. Ended. Publicly." He paused. "We want Corvin Steele to answer for the shelter." Kaler held that for a moment. "And after, Zephyr said. "We want to be somewhere that isn't temporary." Kaler nodded. Then he looked at Idris because Idris had not spoken, and because in the time he had spent across from these three boys, unconscious for most of it, conscious for a fraction, he had learned that what Idris did not say was often the most important thing. Idris looked at him for a long time. Then, "We didn't need a king." Quiet in the room. Otieno, in the doorway, did not move. "We needed someone who would come back," Idris said. Kaler stood with that. The warehouse held the silence the way large spaces do, absorbing it, giving it room, making it feel less like an absence and more like a thing with weight. Then he did something that Otieno had not seen him do in 9 years. He moved to the center of the room. He lowered himself, not to one knee, not the formal gesture of a man performing something. To both knees, slow, deliberate, the way a person kneels when their legs are still rebuilding and the act costs them something. Until he was eye level with Idris. The youngest boy looked at him. Nobody in the warehouse spoke. "I came back," Kaler said. "Not a promise. Not a performance. Just a statement of the thing that was true." Idris held his gaze. Then he nodded. Once. Small. But there. Kaler placed one hand flat on the concrete floor, steadied himself, then stood, slowly, fully, and turned to face the room. "Steele first," he said. "Then the bloodline file. We go public with everything. Every record. Every order. Every name." He looked at Cashin. "Can you get it accessible?" "Already have it," Cashin said. "Has been ready for 3 weeks. Why did you wait?" Cashin glanced at his brothers. "We were waiting for you." Kaler absorbed that. "You could have done it without me." "Yes," Cashin said simply. The fact that they had sat on 3 weeks of damning, city-reshaping information and waited, said something that none of them put into words. Some things do not need words. Outside, the city was beginning its morning. Traffic, light, the ordinary machinery of a place that had been holding its breath for 6 months and was now slowly, unevenly learning to exhale. The war did not end with a gunshot. It ended with a file. Cashin sent it at 9:03 a.m. to 11 recipients simultaneously: journalists, law enforcement contacts, 2 federal channels, and 3 international outlets that could not be pressured by anyone operating locally. By noon, Corvin Steele's name was in every headline. By evening, the bloodline records were public. The shelter, the order, the children who had been listed as unresolved. 3 of them, specifically, names Celestine had kept in her private records. Names that could now be attached to 3 boys in a warehouse on the east side of a city that was, for the first time in a very long time, being asked to answer for itself. Kaler stood outside the warehouse as the afternoon light came down flat and cold and watched the street. Otieno came to stand beside him. "What now?" Otieno said. Kaler thought about the empty chairs, the juice boxes in a line. Idris's voice in a hospital room aimed at a man who could not hear it. You don't get to sleep through this. Now, Kaler said. We stay. Behind him, through the open warehouse door, the sound of Cashin's laptop. Zephyr on the phone. Something logistical, something operational already moving. And Idris, sitting on a crate near the east wall, looking at nothing in particular with those flat, still eyes that measured everything. He was not waiting anymore. None of them were. For the first time, power waited for permission. And for the first time in 8 years, 3 boys who had survived everything the city had decided they shouldn't, had somewhere to be. Not hidden. Not temporary. Just there. If the story moved you, if Idris, Zephyr, and Cashin's journey hit something in you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell us. Which moment in this story stopped you cold? We read every single one. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds you what surviving actually looks like. See you in the next one.